Hi everyone, I want to talk a little bit more about twins and a little bit more about leaven. And this is an interesting image right here. I never noticed that the first time I pulled up these images for Shavuot and for the two loaves. But this pretty much says it all right here. But I want to talk a little bit more about leaven and a little bit more about twins, and what I believe this all has to do with DNA. And I want to explain this image over here. This is Ephraim and Manasseh. And I want to explain what I believe this has to do with DNA. But first, I just want to say that there's several people who are really getting it and understand what I'm talking about. But then there's others who obviously aren't getting what I'm talking about. And I just want to say that if someone doesn't like the video, they're perfectly welcome to explain what it is they don't like about the video. I don't disable comments or anything like that. But if they give the reason for the dislike, then we can see what the reasoning is and what the spirit behind the dislike is, whether it's even coming from someone who even believes in God. Because if someone doesn't believe in God, they're obviously not going to believe that this has anything to do with DNA. In fact, it's very likely that they don't even believe in DNA, because if they believed in DNA, then they would know that there's a creator, because a code cannot write itself. That would be like saying the computer code that runs your computer just evolved suddenly, just naturally by itself. And the discovery of DNA proves that there's no such thing as evolution, at least not the kind that was taught by Darwin, which was long before DNA was even discovered. But the discovery of DNA proves that that's not possible, because you can't have a one-celled organism evolve into a complex multi-celled organism, because everything has a DNA code written inside of it. In every cell there is a code for that particular organism that instructs what that particular organism is designed to do. A prokaryotic cell is always going to be a one-celled organism. It's not going to evolve into a complex multi-celled organism such as animals or plants. As you see here, these are eukaryotic cells, and then a one-celled organism is like a bacteria cell. And so this can never evolve into an animal or a plant or into anything that's more complex than what it was initially designed to be, because it has a code written inside of it that determines what it's going to be. On the other hand, when you have two haploid cells combined together to form a zygote, which is a one-celled organism, it eventually will evolve into what it's designed to be, into whatever the code was that was written in that one-celled organism. It's going to divide and multiply and become what it was designed to be based on the DNA code that was written inside of it. And so my point is, if someone doesn't even believe in God, then it's very unlikely that they're going to believe that God was describing DNA in the Bible. And so when Jesus said in Luke 13 that the kingdom of God is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened, then it's not very likely that they're going to believe that God was talking about DNA when he said that, because they're probably not even going to believe that God encoded words like eureka in the Bible, which means I found it exactly where Jesus was talking about hiding something. In this case, the kingdom of God, they're going to think that the word Eureka just appeared randomly by chance right in that part of the Bible. And they would probably think it's by chance that the word key comes up straight up and down right over here where it says the kingdom of God. And then right under the word key, it says to enter in by the narrow door. To enter in by the narrow door, which is Jesus. So Jesus is the key to the kingdom of God, and he's the way to the kingdom of God. And you see these two words run parallel. They're going to think that that happened randomly by chance. And they're very likely to believe that these names, the names Enoch and Elias, that they just randomly appeared in Revelation 11, where it's talking about the two witnesses, right where it says the two candlesticks standing right in between them. Or when you put it in this way, they're very likely to believe it was just by chance that right between the names Enoch and Elias, you have my two witnesses, the two olive trees. So they would be very likely to believe that's all by chance, because they believe that everything evolved from one-celled organisms, such as this prokaryotic cell, which is a bacteria cell. They believe that this somehow developed into a complex life form, even though there's a code written inside of it that determines what it's always going to be, that it can never be anything else other than the cell it was designed to be. And so I just wanted to get that out of the way because I wanted to talk a little bit more about yeast or leaven and why I believe Jesus said that the kingdom of God is like leaven, which a woman hid or encrypted. You see that word right here in the Greek, it was the word encrypted in 3 measures of meal till all was leavened. And then you see the word Eureka is coming up right where it talks about the leaven or the kingdom of God being hid. You see right here the kingdom of God is hid in the leaven, and this is where God has encoded the word I found it. And so I decided to see what yeast has to do with DNA, and I found this article right here, but first I just want to explain a little bit about yeast. This is Wikipedia here, and it's talking about yeast, and it says yeasts are eukaryotic single-celled microorganisms classified as members of the fungus kingdom. Okay, and I'm just going to skip over this part over here, and I'm just going to go on to over here where it talks about fermentation. It says, by fermentation, the yeast species Saccharomyces cerevisiae converts carbohydrates to carbon dioxide and alcohols. For thousands of years, the carbon dioxide has been used in baking and the alcohol in alcoholic beverages. It is also a centrally important model organism in modern cell biology research and is one of the most thoroughly researched eukaryotic microorganisms. And so if you look at model organism, it says a model organism is a non-human species that is extensively studied to understand particular biological phenomena, with the expectation that discoveries made in the organism model will provide insight into the workings of other organisms. And then when you look at this yeast species that's mentioned over here, which is the one that is used for baking or making alcohol, it says that this species of yeast has been instrumental to winemaking and baking and brewing since ancient times. It is believed to have been originally isolated from the skin of grapes. One can see the yeast as a component of the thin white film on the skins of some dark-colored fruits, such as plums. It exists among the waxes and cuticle. It is one of the most extensively studied eukaryotic model organisms in molecular and cell biology, much like Escherichia coli, which is a prokaryotic cell, is a model for bacterium. Okay, so I may get back to this, but I want to go ahead and go on to this article over here. This was by NBC News, and it's saying here, it's alive. Yeast with human DNA raises new genetic possibilities. Biologists say they swapped human genes into the genetic code used by common yeast cells and found that the cells could continue to function and grow. The results of the experiment, published in this week's issue of the journal Science, support the view that different species use similar genetic toolkits to govern cellular functions. It's a beautiful demonstration of the common heritage of all living things. To be able to take DNA from a human and replace the matching DNA in a yeast cell and have it successfully support the life of the cell. Senior author Edward Marcotte, co-director of the Center of Systems and Synthetic Biology at the University of Texas at Austin, said in a news release. And then it says, Edward Marcotte and his colleagues at the University of Texas at Austin created hundreds of strains of humanized yeast by inserting a single human gene into each strain and turning off the corresponding yeast gene. The experiment also raises the prospect of customizing yeast to test how a range of therapies could affect assorted disease-related mutations in the human genome without putting the humans at risk. Okay, so basically it's saying that the genetic code in yeast is very similar to the genetic code in human genes, so much so that they could even swap a human gene into a code used by common yeast cells and found that the cells could continue to function and grow. Okay, and there's another article here by Stanford University saying why yeast. It says yeast is an apparently strange model for the human genome, but it works because of the high degree of conservation and evolution between the primitive eukaryotic and mammals. Moreover, the genic concentration in yeast with almost no non-coding introns packs the entire yeast genome into 16 chromosomes with only 10% of the DNA in one human chromosome. Human biology permits limited insight into itself because humans are not experimental animals. Cell biologists have long relied on simpler systems to reveal basic properties of the human cell. Likewise, molecular geneticists are gaining insight into the human genome through studies of model organisms. Several species that seem only remotely related to humans have more in common with Homo sapiens in the molecular level than meets the eye. The yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Schizosaccharomyces pombe are examples. And so this is another type of yeast species that they also use as a model organism. It says here Schizosaccharomyces pombe, also called fission yeast, is a species of yeast used in traditional brewing and as a model organism in molecular and cell biology. And so I guess it's not very likely that God was talking about DNA when he was talking about leaven. And this idea of twisting two strands of dough together, just as you see here, this probably didn't have anything to do with DNA either. And it's probably not why challah bread is usually made with 4 strands and the strands of dough are twisted together. and presented at Pentecost or Shavuot, that probably doesn't have anything to do with anything. That's probably just a coincidence.